Hello, I'm Jordan Drebot, and this is the official guided tour for my Masters of Educational Technology ePortfolio. The purpose of this ePortfolio is to make my learning visible to myself, my supervising instructors in the program, and to possible future employers. This was also to serve the purpose of focusing my educational beliefs and academic interests to inform my practice as an educator and guide me in future research endeavors. In order to make learning visible, I've attempted to show the movement of ideas I've experienced in the program. My initial concept was to create a kind of narrative that would act as a path of commentary, linking key assignments, readings, and discussions of my courses in the program. So, the story would not be about the learning artifacts, as we call them, but instead, the artifacts would be about the story. I was wary of choosing an overly specific metaphor early in the design process, for fear that it would shape the emerging narrative, or narratives, as it turned out, of my learning, rather than the other way around, which of course was the plan. So it wasn't until about halfway through this course, eTech 590, that I decided on the theme and a metaphor for this ePortfolio. Currents. Let's take a look. My ePortfolio is organized around three central themes, into which all core content, learning artifacts and reflections, have been interwoven. I have chosen the metaphor of currents to describe these themes, as they represent a continuous progression of certain ideas and questions throughout the 3 years of my MET studies. In this way, I have attempted to make my learning throughout the program visible by tracing the flow of each conceptual current through the various courses, discussions, and assignments of my MET studies. Now for a brief tour of the layout of my site. The site is divided into 5 sections, the links to which are provided here at the top of each page. Well, let's start with the Home section, or Currents section, where the main content of my ePortfolio is located. Right in the middle of the screen, above the ocean currents map, you can see the 3 currents that make up the main content of my ePortfolio: Technology in Learning and Assessment, Reading and Writing in the Digital Age, and Intercultural Digital Communication. Let's look at the first one. As I mentioned earlier, each current is intended to function as a kind of narrative which shows my conceptual development on a particular theme by linking together relevant artifacts from different MET courses. By the way, I've identified learning artifacts with this little orange A icon that you can see scattered throughout the ePortfolio. Okay, let's move on to the second current, Reading and Writing in the Digital Age. As you might imagine based on the title, I've tried to include a range of media here, including a wiki, educational websites, interactive flash content, a video, and even some hyperfiction. And now we move on to the final of the 3 currents, which is Intercultural Digital Communication. Now, this current contains less artifacts and is admittedly less developed than the other 2. It's really a current that's just getting started, so you'll find a lot of questions and not too many conclusions. Basically, it details how some ideas that came up over the course of my MET studies have become areas of research interest for me. And so you'll see at the bottom of the page an option to follow this current to my research base camp, which is intended to be a kind of personal resource to help me get some of my ideas off the ground. Feel free to take a look if you're interested, and visitors are encouraged to leave feedback or share their ideas. Okay, let's take a look at the other sections of this site. Looking at the menu up at the top of the page, you can see the 4 sections that make up the rest of my ePortfolio: About this site, Bio, My MET Journey, and New Currents Begin. The first two are pretty straightforward. About this site contains, well, obviously information about this site. The bio section, as you might guess, contains personal and academic information. My MET Journey is where I look back on my experience in the MET program as a whole. This contains a complete list of the courses I've studied in the program, as well as reflections on my overall experience. That takes us to the final section of my site, which is New Currents Begin. And the purpose of this section is to move from making connections between ideas to making connections between ideas and practical applications in the real world, as well as to consider what new journeys I may be starting due to my experiences in MET. And here I talk about some of my plans for the upcoming new school term. As well, I talk about a project that I actually started before my MET studies, and that due to my experience working on a number of MET assignments, I now have the Flash and web authoring skills to complete. It's an interactive resource to help students with their pronunciation in English. I've only just gotten started, but if you're interested, feel free to check out my progress on this project. And finally, I move into introducing my areas of research interest that were sparked during my Masters of Educational Technology studies. And that concludes the site tour. Now I'd like to share with you the process through which I conceptualized and created my ePortfolio. First, I read and skimmed over all my course assignments in MET and all my discussion posts. Then I looked for patterns and recurring themes, and then chose the three that stood out as being the most developed, or at least most interesting to me. Then I selected artifacts on that theme, which was quite easy to do since it was actually the artifacts that led to my theme in the first place. Then I made preliminary sketches linking artifacts and thematic ideas. The chronological representation of these ideas was what led to the eventual creation of my currents theme, as I could see a source and direction of the progression of ideas and of my understanding on the topic. After all, ideas and knowledge are not fixed but are in constant motion. And I thought the currents theme really expressed that well. The next step was to make preliminary sketches of a possible site layout, and at this point I migrated to CMaps and started to design my site. And once I had a basic possible site layout down, I moved over to Dreamweaver and started the actual construction process. Which brings me to a final point. I decided early on that rather than use a website builder application or template, I wanted to take this opportunity to increase my web authoring skills and build the site from the ground up on my own. Since gaining skills and competence in web and multimedia design was one of my personal goals in the program, building a website and the associated student resource, which I mentioned earlier, seemed a fitting approach to the creation of this concluding project. I think that overall, the ePortfolio I've created is successful in fulfilling its purpose of making my learning in the MET program visible. Educational theories such as connectivism and distributed cognition hold that human thought and learning do not reside exclusively within the individual, but also in the connections between one's thoughts, tools and elements of the physical world, other people, and the various networks of which we are a part. Thus, through making my ideas and the connection between them visible, I hope that this ePortfolio will allow me to extend my cognition and serve as a resource that will help to focus my interests and support my professional and conceptual development for years to come. As well, I hope to maintain my connections to the human network I've become a part of over the past 3 years. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video.